the atheist YouTube community. Dear YouTube atheists, it seems we've developed a bit of a misunderstanding.
Well, Brock, I don't think there's any misunderstanding whatsoever. The atheist YouTube community understands full well that you are an arrogant, smug individual with precisely zero basis for being either of those things.
I've received your countless comments and PMs stating your supposed deeply felt offense at my many opinions and comments about the atheistic worldview.
Why did you feel the necessity to toss in the qualifier supposed? I can assure you there's nothing supposed about the offence that people feel in the face of your continued gross distortions. It's quite evident that you don't in fact care, that your videos are riddled with nothing but distortions.
Hear me clearly this time. I do not hate atheists. Moreover, I do not harbor ill will towards any non-believer.
You know what, I basically believe you when you say that. I accept that you don't actually feel emotional hatred for atheists and sundry non-believers. But you know what? It doesn't matter. The practical end result is almost identical. What one sees in you, Brock, is an absolute contempt for truth and reason, a cavalier disregard for intellectual and by extension ethical propriety. That contempt and disregard leads you to engage in rhetoric that for all practical purposes may as well be driven by actual hatred.
You will search my video library in vain to find any personal attack, any pointed name-calling. Ironically, such a thing is not true of my many accusers. What you are sure to find, however, are unapologetic verbal and intellectual assaults on the poisonous and dangerous intellectual worldview of modern-day atheism.
Well, Brock, it's certainly evident that as a postgrad communications major, you've learnt a thing or two about the art of spin doctoring. But you know what? Spin is pretty damn transparent to the intelligent. The breathtakingly obvious reason that you are subject to personal insults and verbal attacks is that you are one person. Your claim that you don't engage in such behaviour yourself is an unmitigated lie, or at least a typical Brock distortion. You simply lump entire groups of people together and do it that way. If you imagine that individual atheists don't experience your rhetoric on a personal level, then I suggest you visit the question of whether you are, as they say in the classics, batshit crazy. The other point I'd make here is that you would no doubt defend your rhetoric on the basis of that fine old adage of the truth is its own defence. In other words, you believe that the things you say are true. Well, you know, I'm free to invoke that very same adage when I say that I believe that you are a contemptible shit. Now, the principle of the truth being its own defence either follows in all cases or in no cases, Brock.
These many statements are clearly made at the larger umbrella that is the anti-theist religion, not individual atheists.
Well, there's a modicum of truth to that. Only a modicum, but that's the part that I'll address. It's not just individual atheists that have an issue with you. It's most atheists. The reason that they have that issue with you is precisely because of the lies and distortions and spin and nauseating smugness. Most atheists arrive at their atheism through the vehicle of an intellectual conscience. Your bullcrap stands as an offence to that intellectual conscience. Your glaring disregard for intellectual integrity is something that most atheists simply don't see fit to tolerate. And why should they? You cannot publicly characterize the supposed worldview of a group of people who in fact do not possess a collective worldview anyway, but I think everyone's given up trying to explain that particular point to you, as poisonous and dangerous, etc., without that having consequences for those people. You don't seem to want to accept that. Anti-theist and anti-religion atheists accept the consequences of their position and their characterizations. They know full well that theists and sundry religionists will respond to those characterizations defensively. The real issue, the real question here, is who is telling the truth? Who is demonstrating some measure of the aforementioned intellectual integrity? It sure as hell isn't you, sir.
I am more than aware of the indisputable fact that there are wonderful individuals void of belief. I know very well that under the tent that is atheism, there are wonderful fathers, wonderful wives, wonderful sons, wonderful daughters, stellar individuals of every kind and every shade. This seems to me so obvious it feels elementary to even have to address it.
The reason you have to address it is because there's an incongruity between what you've just said and everything else you say about atheism and atheists. It's difficult to see how, from your perspective, an atheist can be any of those things you just stated when their entire worldview is poisonous, dangerous, devoid of any kind of moral foundation, and all of the other things that you've said about atheism. That obvious incongruity does require explanation.
However, becoming painfully aware of my generation's thin-skinned narcissism, it seems even this once commonly understood form of communication needs to be relearned. To speak of anything whatsoever requires generalization.
Well, the stupidity of that statement you just made aside, I actually agree with what you were attempting to say about generalizations. They are important and they are not in and of themselves invalid. But you know what? They have to be accurate. The idea of bringing accuracy to your generalizations is one that clearly has yet to dawn on you.
When I, the atheist antidote, say that the godless worldview yields specific consequences, this is not to say that there aren't individual atheists that serve as the exception to the rule.
Brock, no one cares about being an exception to your bullshit rhetorical rule. That's not the issue here. The issue is that your generalizations are in and of themselves entirely absent of reality. They don't speak to any reality save that of your own confabulations, your own invented demons. Nobody gives a damn about being an exception to your stated generalizations. What they care about is that your generalizations are false to begin with.
The interesting thing about this I'm offended YouTube atheist epidemic is that if the atheist worldview was as tagless and non-specific as you guys are always saying it is, the generalizations made on this channel about the agenda and the ramifications of atheistic thought would not elicit the reaction that it always does.
Well, firstly, it should be noted that it's not just atheists who find the content of your videos to be an affront to reason and to decency. I think you'll find plenty of mainstream Christians and theists in general also find it to be so.
I contend that the fits of atheistic clenched fist fury are demonstrated because of the truths that reveal themselves right here on this channel.
I contend that you are a pedophile and a wife-beater, and that you abuse your own children on a regular basis. I similarly contend that if this upsets you and you respond in any defensive way to it, that it will simply prove the truth of my contention. Much like in a recent incident when a YouTuber suggested that perhaps your wife was a plagiarist much like yourself, you responded by blocking them. In other words, it upset you. In what sense ought we not take your response as an indication that that person's insinuation was not in fact true? I hope you get my point here, Brock, and that you will rethink what you said.
The anti-God at all cost crowd has enjoyed shelter in the shadows of ambiguity for too long, shape-shifting their identity at will as to never be pinned down.
Well, I'm sorry, Brock, if the truth of atheism does not fit your desperate desire to slot atheism into a category that suits your own purposes. I'm afraid you'll just have to live with that fact. Or, as is your obvious want, simply lie and distort so as to make that square peg fit that round hole. And please, Brock, try and heed the point that I made about the fact that people tend not to enjoy being lied about, and their distaste for being lied about in no way indicates that they secretly agree with the lies.